These are great readings. And every pastor loves the first one because basically we use it as a stewardship thing and say, well, y'all go sell your houses and bring it and just lay it here and we'll make sure we find a use for it. But that's not what we're going to do with it. About 5 years ago, I shared a story around this time of year. We had been at church at that point less than a year, and it was a story that spoke to us. And I couldn't find the same exact version I had shared then, so this is a little variation. So those of you who were here may remember it, and those of you who weren't here, it's brand new to you. And for some of us who were here, it's also brand new. Just the way it works when you get to be our age. Many years ago, there was a little village on a rocky sea coast where storms often battered and seas were treacherous. Ships had been driven into the rocks and the lives of many sailors lost. One day, the people who lived there decided they needed to build a lighthouse and a life-saving station on their peninsula that would warn the ships and hopefully save lives. They gathered the necessary funds. See, it goes back to that first reading. And soon they built a tower with a beacon, organized a lookout system, bought boats, and learned how to maneuver them, and they were in business, the business of saving lives. Fewer ships were battered on the rocks, and when such a tragedy did occur, the alarm was sounded and people risked their own lives to rescue those who had been cast into the raging waters. Within a few years, people came from great distance to study the lighthouse and use it as a model for their own. One day, someone suggested that since they all spent so much time at the lighthouse, it sounds like us, they should gather there occasionally and enjoy fellowship. Soon they began to get together, at first infrequently and then more often, at the lighthouse. In fact, many people began to build their homes near the lighthouse. Well, we have room to do that now. Then when the lookout sounded the alarm, they were there, ready to go out in the boats. Next, it was decided they were going to spend, that if they were going to spend so much time there, they must make the place more comfortable. So they added heat to the lighthouse. They painted the walls, they put rugs on the floors, and they installed a fine kitchen. And the lighthouse became a nice place to spend time waiting for the alarm to be sounded. We may not have installed a fine kitchen here, but we sure found a way to eat nonetheless. Everything about the lighthouse was made comfortable, and it soon became the center of life in the little town that grew around it. One night, a fierce storm blew in. Many ships were tossed on the rocks, and the people at the lighthouse spent long hours picking sailors from the bitter cold waters and taking them to the life-saving station, where they were fed and given dry clothing. This had happened many times over the years, but this time, after the storm subsided and the sailors had all left the lighthouse, there were some who were angry. It seems the storm had made them leave the comfort of the lighthouse and go out into the wet, dangerous seas, and they had gotten cold, too cold. The sailors delivered to the lighthouse soiled the carpets and left the kitchen a mess. So it was decided that when they brought sailors to the lighthouse, they would first be taken to the basement to be cleaned up. Sometime later, another storm blew in, and half the people went out in the boats and picked up sailors from the waters. This time, the ship which had broken apart on the rocks was from another nation, and the sailors spoke another language and were of a different color. After this storm, a few more joined those who had earlier refused to go out to rescue others from the sea. They decided that people like these did not belong in the lighthouse, and some said they felt that the lighthouse's job was not to be saving sailors from other lands. There were also those who objected to leaving the comfort of the lighthouse to go out in the storm. So finally it was decided that the beacon would be kept lit, but the rescue work would be discontinued. A small group disagreed and went a short distance down the coast and started a new lighthouse. This small group decided they should establish the biggest life-saving station on the peninsula, and they did. Every day they warned ships and sometimes attempted to save lives from the icy water. Fame of the new lighthouse grew, and the lighthouse back up the bay eventually turned off its beacon. Some people say the beacon can still be seen today in you and in me. And yes, they also say that that small group running the new lighthouse were those once rescued from the raging storm at sea. I'm not sure where you see us in this little metaphor, but I'm hoping, despite how I try to suck you in, that you see yourself as a church of the second lighthouse. We who were rescued from our own storms created sanctuary. We moved down the road, and we're moving down the road again. Move on down the road. To be sanctuary, to be extravagant welcome, to bring people in from the storms of life, and let them know that they will not be thrown out because of what their lives have held. They will be welcome. They will be safe. They will find sanctuary. Last week we talked about, if you remember, I know I love to do these little quizzes, not seeing is believing, which seems to be a sermon topic that fires up for folks on this Sunday with this reading. But last week we talked about believing is seeing. How those of us who believe in this man, Jesus Christ, risen now as our Christ, has made a difference in believing in him. Lets us see life, lets us see one another, lets us see those who are other to us, who are strangers, who are outcasts. We sang about all those in that first song. Lets us see them differently, not as outsiders and outcasts, but as part of the family. For those who were there so many years ago when we had all these papers on the floor of a living room trying to figure out what to name this little congregation, family kept coming up. To see one another as family. You know, family rubs each other the wrong way a lot of the time. We say things that annoy each other. Al's always saying stuff to me, and I have to keep biting my tongue. Pretty soon it's going to be so short, I'm going to be lisping. But we love in family. We forgive in family. And we take care of each other. This first reading, the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Is that not what Christ calls us to? To be of one heart and one soul. Yeah, we screw up and get it wrong. I do a lot of the times, and Al's there to remind me. But we get that the one heart and one soul that is ours comes from Jesus Christ, who forgave everything. Everything. And opened everybody. There's a book that was written about 7 or 8 years ago called Unchristian. What a New Generation Really Thinks About Christianity. It was written by a man named David Kinnaman. It was a study, a statistical research and extensive interviews from a 3-year period, and it documents what 16 to 29-year-olds think about Christians. And according to the study, these are 16 to 29-year-olds who are not part of organized religion. They don't belong to a church. But when they look at what they see as Christians in the world, this is what they see. They see that 87% of the Christians they see are judgmental. 85% are hypocritical. There's something that says 78% are old-fashioned, but I don't know what that means. 75% are too political. After all, the United Church of Christ did win that lawsuit, that federal lawsuit in North Carolina. 72% are out of touch with reality. Out of touch with reality. I want you to look at each other and think, you're out of touch with reality because you think everybody's welcome here. What's wrong with you all? You don't think that we should have those people that know are bouncing people out of here or keeping people from coming in. Remember that old UCC commercial? Remember that? The bouncer commercial? All the people who were bounced out? Yeah. 70% are perceived as insensitive to others. And if you've not felt yourself included yet in this survey, 68% are considered boring. Just talk about that church stuff. There they go again. You can hear my nieces and nephews going, here she goes again. You gotta listen to it again. And just for my nieces and nephews that might be listening, I'm going to keep inviting you to like our Facebook page until you do. So if you want me to stop annoying you, you might want to like it sooner rather than later. I think if David Kinnaman had done this survey in the first century, he wouldn't have had the same results about what people thought about Christians back then. Dan Clendenin says, those first century followers of Jesus were unschooled and ordinary people, but they proclaimed their message with courage and boldness. With courage and boldness. Think about it. You're welcome. You're welcome here. Nobody can keep you from God. Nobody can tell you you don't belong. Nobody can tell you that Jesus cast you off, because he didn't. In Jerusalem, converts joined the movement en masse. First 3,000 people, then increasing to 5,000 people. That's from Acts. That's probably an amazing statistic from the first century at Jerusalem. I have no idea. Rabbi, you were there. How many people, was that a big percentage? That was a pretty big percentage, right? You don't remember, I know. He's kind of dozing off, so I thought I'd wake him up. All the people were of one heart and one mind. And they sold what they needed to sell. You know, there's all kinds of research around that. Did everybody go out and sell everything they owned and give it to the church? No, that's not really what happened. And Steve said that even if they had, he wouldn't be doing that today. Because I remember him saying that at book club one night. But that's not really what they think. You know, it happened on occasion. But if somebody needed something, somehow the church, the Christian community gathered, found a way to make sure whoever needed something got what she or he needed. That's radical. And you know what? I keep seeing that happen week after week in this congregation. If I don't physically see it, I hear the stories of how it's being done. How if somebody needed something, somehow, they found a resource. Maybe somebody pointed them out to an organization. Maybe somebody physically handed them something. There's always been a way that somebody who's needed something has had what they've needed. That is not to say that we have everything we want. It is to say we have what we need. And we talked about this at Christmas, you know, all that stuff that comes wrapped up, and you get it all, and then it's all open, and it's so cool for like 9 minutes and 70 seconds more or something, I don't know, some crazy amount of time, and then it's over. You unwrap it all, and it's over. It's not what we want. It's what we need. And you know what? I really think that's the hardest kind of love to give somebody. You know, our granddaughters were here this week, and to give them really what they needed and not what they just wanted, boy, that's radically countercultural. To give them what they need, not what they want. You know, they talk about the entitlement generation, how the kids today are being, you know, kind of enculturated to think that they're entitled. And it's like, don't teach them they're entitled. Teach them their love. That's what will sustain them in life. Teach them their love. And they got all kinds of monster love this week, those kids. I know I got to be the monster. I'm real good at that. Mary gives them grandma hugs. I give them monster hugs when it's bedtime. Dan Clendenin asked this question. He said, you know what? What's so radical about first century Christians that this survey wouldn't have had the same answers then? And he comes up with an answer. He said, in a word, generosity. That's what made the first century Christians stand out from their culture. Generosity. Social generosity expressed in community, and financial generosity expressed in compassion. When there's a need, the need somehow gets met here. He continues, following the example of Jesus, the first Christians broke down social barriers and disregarded religious taboos that distinguished between the ritually clean and the unclean. If you want to know more about that, Steve is available from 12 to 12:07 today. The ritually clean and the unclean. Okay? Some women at some points in the month were considered ritually unclean. Lepers were unclean. People who ate the wrong thing and wore the wrong thing were ritually unclean. Am I leaving anybody out, or did I say anything incorrect? But it's like, you know, and it made sense in its time. I don't want to denigrate it. It made sense in its time. But what the Christian community said, you know what? Come on in. Come on in. I don't really know anybody that's had leprosy, but I know people who feel like other people have treated them as if they were lepers. So the Christians said, no, that's not a distinction. There's no worthy and unworthy. Have you been in a church where there's worthy and unworthy? Have you been in a church where your worth is calculated and printed out on a spreadsheet at the end of the fiscal year for everybody in the congregation to read and see how much you gave? We don't do that here. The respectable and the unrespectable. You know, there are people that would come into this church and watch how the pastor messed up the music ministry today and go, boy, that is just so unrespectful. That's just so disrespectful. That's not a good service at all. What is wrong with those folks? But in this little congregation, moving on down the road, no blame and no shame. Don't do it perfectly. There are those who don't like the way my hair looks anymore. I know. It's called growing out. I prefer that to having to grow up, so it's a little bit easier on me. The early Christians of one heart and one mind. Faith Family United Church of Christ. Are we of one heart and one mind when it comes to the reality that we see that is different from a reality that other people see Christians as, and even a reality that maybe we didn't see a few months ago, a few years ago, a few decades ago? I was unchurched for several years. I kept saying, no, no, no. Somebody else kept saying, oh yeah, oh yeah. A century after Luke wrote Acts, the early Christians had a reputation for building bridges of community. And one of the early, he's called one of the church fathers, one of the church abbas, Tertullian, who was, I was reading this, who was kind of an angry kind of guy, and he would get people get mad at him because he was so vehemently in people's faces about stuff. But one of the things he wrote when he wasn't being angry, Tertullian, was this. And it was written sometime between 155 and 220. Think about it. How old was this? And it survives. Our care for the derelict and our act of love have become our distinctive sign. And their enemies, now the enemies at that time were those in power in the Roman Empire, would say, see, they say how they love one another and how ready they are to die for one another. Ready to die for one another. Now, they literally did that. We're not going to reenact any of that in this church. But here's what I see you do. You die to self a little bit. You die to I want a little bit so that somebody has I need taken care of. We're not going to be in the Colosseum together with lions charging us. But we are going to find ourselves in places on our journey where I say, you know what, I don't really need that. I just want it. But somebody else does need this. And at some point, that whole thought process goes away for us, and you just make sure whoever has a need has it, and you think later about what you didn't get as you were taking care of that need. It's not even conscious at some point. It goes away. And I know you know that. I'm not telling you anything you haven't experienced. 3 centuries later, the pagan emperor Julian the Apostate, you don't want to be like him, who vehemently opposed Christians and stripped them of their rights and privileges, said this: the godless Galileans feed not only their own poor, but ours also. Those godless Galileans. That crazy church moving on down the road feeds and clothes and finds treasure chest gifts and school supplies, whatever else they see in the community. Not for just their own, but including their own, but for others. For others. I've had a number of people come up to me and say, why do we give school supplies to that church? Well, I guess because Sue works there. I think that's how it started. And you say, well, it's not a poor school. No, it's a school with poor children. Who falls through the cracks? The invisible ones. Oh, that school, they got all kinds of stuff. Except for the 10 families that live in cars. You know, we see with a different reality. And I think that's what this second reading is about. I didn't think this up. David Luce said it first, so I'm going to give him credit in case he's listening, so he doesn't have to sue me. Copyright infringement. He said, you know what? When Jesus spoke to Thomas, he wasn't calling him out. He wasn't chastising him. He was inviting him. He's inviting him, and we talk about that all the time. God doesn't call us out. God doesn't chastise us. God doesn't make us feel guilty. God invites us. And God invited Thomas, that David Luce calls the pragmatist, the realist, to see a different reality. To see a different reality. It's not about us. And so he sees this different reality. We need to continue, because I think we already do, to act out of the reality that we see, that we hear the call to do. You know, any number of people in this church I've heard talk about the church building and the church property we bought. I haven't heard one person say, oh, we're going to be able to have bigger parties there. We're going to be able to have 3-course dinners there now. We're going to be able to. Every single person I've heard has said, we can do so much more once we get into that building for the people we find. And that's what it's all about. So Jesus invites us to see a bigger reality, the reality of another person's need. And I invite you now, as we share God's love and peace, to go to one another and share in prayer whatever your need. I will pray that you have it met. Let us see that different reality here, because that's what the Christians do, but also beyond here, because that's what Christians do. So let us share God's love and peace, telling one another we shall pray for whatever it is you need.
Just now.